Welcome to the Vital Mentality podcast. I'm your host, Angel Munro. We're talking all things health and wellness. We're looking at ways to live a vital life. Short disclaimer, this is not intended as medical advice. This is just for general purposes only. So today we're going to talk about water. Lots of people have been weighing in on whether cold, plunging and ice baths are a good idea or not, and especially for women. So I thought it was a really good idea to unpack that a little bit and put it into a little bit more context than what you often get from the sound bites that you see in social media. And we're also going to be looking at water from more of a holistic point of view. And we're going to be looking at water as consciousness and its ability to transmit and receive information. We're going to look at easy water, which is the gel-like structure that water resides as in the body. And we're also going to look at water as a therapeutic beyond hydration, specifically around hot and cold exposure and its applications for preventative, acute and chronic conditions. So first off, I wanted to talk a bit about water as consciousness and its ability to communicate, transmit and receive information. One of the most probably famous people one of the most famous people that started working in this area was Dr. Emoto, where he was a Japanese scientist who's no longer around, but his son, I believe, is still carrying on with his experiments. He would take an image of water, a glass of water, after he had said words to it, and he would look under a microscope and see what the images were. So if he said something like love or happiness or you're beautiful, you'd get these beautiful snowflake floral kind of perfect symmetry images. And if you said things like I hate you, you're horrible, you'd get these shard-like structures. And he repeated these experiments with all different kinds of things, including music, and this thing carried on. Another woman called Veda Austin, who is currently doing these experiments, she started off by looking at water through a creative lens, because she found when she was inspired by Emoto's work, I believe, that if she would say certain things, she developed her own method of photographing these images and freezing these images, and she would find the same images for the same words coming up over and over again. She calls them hydroglyphs. And it's now kind of branched into the realm of science, because she's taught this method, and people all around the world using different water sources are getting the exact same images when they say the same thing to the water. So which is really, really remarkable. I saw her speaking briefly the other day on a podcast, and she was saying how she was with a friend who was pregnant, and so she sat a container of water in front of her, and she said, just think about your baby for a minute. And the woman did that. She took the water and she put it in the fridge and froze it and did her usual thing, looked at the photograph, and there was this she showed the photograph of the water, and it was this image that was exactly like you would see in a what's it called? Oh my God, why is it ultrasound? Sorry. Exactly the same as what you'd seen in the ultrasound. And the baby had this beautiful white kind of aura around the spinal cord and over the crown of the head, which was really amazing. And then at the bottom of the image, there were these two hands. And she said what was remarkable is that the woman, when she was concentrating on her baby, had her hands on the belly. So the water relayed this dualistic perspective, not only just of what they wanted, which was the baby, but also showing that it had seen the hands of the mother. And her her work is really extraordinary when you start to see how much water is its own entity, and we're 99% water by molecular weight. We have an intelligence. So I guess, it's not that surprising that water would also have an intelligence. But we kind of usually think of water of this inert kind of thing that, hydrates our body and keeps our mouths wet. But really, there's a lot more to it than that. She did this other experiment, which I just love. She looked at the albumin, which is the egg white of chicken eggs. And essentially the egg white is like similar to you'd consider it easy water, which is what we're going to talk about in a minute, which is what we find inside our bodies. And the chicken that had been caged chicken egg had these shard-like structures, like I was describing before when you'd said something negative to water. And the free-range organic eggs had these beautiful floral, snowflakey structures to it. And then she did another experiment after that where she put a caged egg next to a chicken egg for a certain amount of time. And then she did her method again. And they both had the same beautiful floral snowflake structure. So, and she did this over and over again, and she got the same thing. So basically, the water would resonate with its most powerful, the water would start resonating with its most positive resonance with the body of water that was closest to it. And that to me is amazing. So basically, water wants to resonate at the most highest vibration that it can. And if it is near a high vibration, it will mirror that. And I think that just it really has some beautiful connotations. I was thinking about it, and this is just speculation. It's not proof on my part at all, but I was thinking about the nocebo and the placebo effect. And nocebo, I've spoken about this before. Most people know about it, but I'll just run down quickly if you don't. Placebo is when you would take a sugar pill thinking it was a Panadol, you have a headache, and it works just like a Panadol, even though it was a sugar pill because you believed it. And nocebo is, say, someone had told you were going to take a pill and it was going to give you really bad side effects, and it was a sugar pill, but you had the bad side effects. Or someone told you you had terrible disease and you start manifesting the symptoms, and then 5 minutes later they say, oh no, we were wrong, you don't have that disease, and the symptoms go away. These two phenomena are so prevalent and so strong in human beings that scientists have to do everything that they can in experiments to try and safeguard those phenomena from happening, because that's when you hear terms like double-blinded scientific trials. It's because they're trying to get rid of these kind of phenomena. And if you think about the chickens, the positive chicken or the negative, and the negative chicken both being together and resonating with whatever's closest to them, it kind of makes sense that if we think something good or something bad is going to happen, we deliver that information to the internal waters in our body. Because as we can see when we look at these experiments, this is what water's doing. It's communicating information. And I think if we start to think about health in that way, it changes a lot. There was a really good interview with a woman called Catherine Clinton. It was on the way forward. I'll put it in the show notes. So it was just a couple of weeks ago that I heard it. And she mentioned a whole lot of other scientists that are looking into this area, into the area of water's ability to communicate and transmit information and energy. So I highly recommend listening to that if you want to dig deeper into this topic. And there's another woman, Isabel Friend. She's done a lot of work in this area. And then, of course, Victor Schauberger, who was maybe around the 1800s. I could have that wrong. His work's pretty dense to read, like anything from that time. But I think here's another one to look at if you want to get more into water. The last person I'm going to mention is Gerald Pollack. He's done a lot of work on the area of easy water. So basically, when you cut yourself open, like I said before, we're 99% water by molecular weight, but if we accidentally cut ourselves, water doesn't come gushing out. And that's because we have this fourth phase of water, this gel-like consistency within our cells. And Gerald Pollack has, because basically before people thought there were three phases of water, solid, liquid, and gas, but he's worked out that there's this fourth phase, this gel phase, and he called it easy water because they found that when they were doing experiments that there was this exclusion zone that would happen when you introduced a charge to the water. And if you want to go ahead, I put some links into his work, so if you want to I'll put a link to his website, and all of his papers are on there, and he's got a few books. So if you want to get your head around the science around that, I have, go and do that. I'm going to just briefly talk about what it means inside the body. So what they found created this gel. So you need the gel, mitochondria need this, the more of this fourth phase water that has this great exclusion zone happening, the more mitochondria we have, the more energy we have, the more our tissues are healthy, the less disease we have. This easy water is essential to our health, and things that maintain easy water is sun, earthing, so feet on the ground, because basically we need we need a native electrical magnetic frequency from food, from fresh food, from the earth, from the sun, from fresh air, from good fats. Like they've done experiments, they found fats like butter, ghee, and coconut oil and other animal fats help to keep this charge. And which is basically just being around nature, consuming nature, that holds the charge for us. And they also did some experiments where they found things like glyphosate ruined that easy water, EMFs ruin that water. So like the easiest way to maintain easy water in the body is to be around nature as much as possible. And drinking water obviously is really important, but water is if we think about water in its natural state, it would come from the spring or a river, a moving body that's charged through the earth. And we have this dead water that's polluted that comes through the taps. And so, I always talk about filtering water, which is super important, but it doesn't necessarily bring back that charge. Certain ways that I love to bring a bit more charge back into my water is I love the fulvic minerals, because that's essentially adding dirt, which you'd get from spring water, minerals back into the water. I love you can also hold it up to your heart. Our heart has a frequency to it, and it can, like, the two chicken eggs, holding it to the heart, which has a high vibration, can really help. The other thing that I didn't mention that easy water forms from is from anything hydrophilic, so water loving. And water loving things are things like plants. So even, essentially, if you put a slice of lemon or a sprig of mint or a couple of rose petals, rose has a really high frequency as well, into your water, you're essentially, because these are hydrophilic and they have their own easy to them, that's the chicken white story again. You end up getting the kind of dead water that we get out of the taps and then hopefully filtered regains this charge from another life force body of water. Metals have a certain charge to them too. Sometimes even, if you think about spring water, it goes in this vortex. There's lots of companies that sell things to restructure water, and I don't think that people need to do that. So that's why I'm mentioning things like, the lemon and the mint, or holding it to your heart, because these things naturally restructure. So the other thing that I was going to say is using a silver spoon, which you can still get vintage silver, and creating a vortex with the silver spoon, that also, or even copper, that helps reestablish the charge to the water. And from all of Gerald Pollack's work, the more easy, like I said in the beginning, the better health outcomes you have across all areas. I forgot things like, I forgot to mention sauna and exercise too. They also build easy. So anything that generates heat in the body. And this kind of goes on, touching on to water as a therapeutic. One of the best therapies that the body has as a natural mechanism is sweating. And people, it's kind of, I've spoken about this before. I think there's a podcast I did, what I do if I have a cold or flu. And I mentioned in that how sweating is really essential, and it's pretty clear in the literature now that the idea of interrupting it with Panadols and stuff is actually a bad idea, even though we used to think it was a good idea. And it's because it creates this heat in the body, which allows waste to exit the body, and it actually recharges the body when it needs it. So yes, using certain herbs and using water therapy as a means to bring on sweating in certain conditions is an incredible therapeutic. So in terms of hot water and cold water exposure, I think we'll talk about, the ice plunge phenomena first. I think the context that's missing is, if we think about how our bodies are designed to interact with nature, and before modernity set in, where we're sitting inside in winter in warm, heated areas, not actually adapting to the cold, and then we're eating food out of season as well, and so it's had the wrong sun exposure for the time of year. Our kind of internal clocks and circadian rhythm in regards to the seasons is completely out of whack. And so I think when people never go outside, and like I said, they're eating out of season food, and if in the beginning of winter they decided to start cold plunging, that would be a terrible idea. And I think that's one of the reasons why you see some people saying they have, bad reactions to doing cold plunging, because it's meant to, the benefits of it is to work that muscle of adaptation that we're missing. I think that's why it's having such a resurgence, because we're not actually getting the proper hot and cold exposure that we would have, because we're living in these artificial environments all the time. And so, I actually swim twice a week in the bay, sometimes more. It definitely gets down to twice a week when the weather gets cold, as it is here right now. Been doing it for about 3 or 4 years. And when I first started, a few of my friends had already started swimming. and they said, would you like to come swimming with us? And I said, sure. It was April, so mid-autumn, and I think it must have been towards the end of April. And I got there and they all had spring wetsuits on, so bare legs, but covered it on the body and the bum and the arms. And I just had a bikini with me, and I was freezing. I couldn't warm up. Afterwards, I felt super slow when I was swimming. Yeah, it was not good, but I love the water. So I got myself a wetsuit and came back a few weeks later and joined them. And I've been doing it every week ever since. But I always say to people who are shocked that I do that through winter, that actually you probably need to start in summer, because, when you're going every, a couple of times a week, you do acclimate to it. Your body gets used to it. And that's why you see people living in really cold conditions and they're fine, and people living in warm conditions and they're fine. You get used to the climate that you're in. And I was actually talking to another guy that swims down the beach today, and he goes every day. And he said that if he misses out on even a day, he suffers. So, yeah, it's a practice. Cold water exposure increases your mitochondria. So basically the powerhouses in your cells. The more mitochondria you have, the better health outcomes you have, again, in every area. And it improves the nervous system function, mood, cardiovascular, which lots of people caution around cold water swimming with cardiovascular health. And again, I think it's taken out of context. Looking at the literature, I put all the show notes of things that I'm referencing, all of the research papers I'm referencing, I'll put it in the show notes, sorry. But improved cardiovascular outcomes. So anyone with any heart conditions from cold water exposure, their chance of being ill or dying is reduced from cold water exposure. However, if you had a heart condition and you have never swum, like I said before, never been into the cold water, you go into an ice bath at a health, a gym or something, and you've never done it before, it's the middle of winter and you're a little bit unwell, then it's probably going to be a really bad idea. And but if you had started in summer and you started, say, just putting your hands in the ice water every morning, or just putting your face in ice water every morning, and then you worked up to a cold shower, and then you worked up to getting in the bay or the ocean, you would slowly have a tolerance to it, and it would end up being like a preventative medicine rather than something that's dangerous. So, the other thing that people have been, I'll keep going with the benefits. So cardiovascular, the nervous system, so improves mood, improves your stress response. It improves birth outcomes. It stimulates brown fat and increases the amount of brown fat, which means that you have more burning of fat. The more brown you have, you've got white, grey, and brown. And the more brown fat you have, the better you are at actually burning white fat. So cold water exposure, it increases the amount of brown fat in relation to the other kinds. And it's basically, and increases muscle and increases that heat that burns the fat altogether. So it's excellent for metabolism and body composition. It's good for the immune system. Again, look at that podcast where I said what I do when I have a cold or flu. I've got some issues with the immune system. I like to say detox and regeneration. But I definitely, even in Chinese medicine and before germ theory, like even in the 1800s, people knew that dramatic changes in weather and temperature and humidity could affect health. And so again, that's the reason for having this ability to adapt. And that's why cold exposure, in my opinion, that's why it works, because you're adapted to it. So when weather does change, your body can adapt to cold because it's had that pressure, that small. The body actually responds really well to certain stresses, and that's things like hot and cold exposure, exercise, fasting. There's certain stresses that makes the body thrive, actually, and makes the body more adaptable to outside stresses. One of the other, I mentioned Chinese medicine, and one of the other thing that I see getting brought up a lot on social media is Chinese medicine doesn't recommend people getting cold. And I think this is taken out of context, definitely. For sure, when it is wintertime, it is, in Chinese medicine, is really important from their perspective to keep the internal organs warm, to be, covered with warmth all the time, and to be eating warm, nourishing foods, not cold drinks. And there's especially an emphasis on this with women as well around menstruation. However, again, we're talking about, when you think about when Chinese medicine was developed, people would have been having more cold exposure. They would have had more time outside, more hands in cold water, possibly more bare feet exposure. I run maybe 4 times a week, and I take my shoes off when I get to the park, and the water will be still wet from the dew, and that's cold water. That's cold exposure as well, cold water exposure as well. So, when you think about, thousands of years ago, I don't think people were sitting inside with heaters on all the time. They would have had this adaptation. I don't think in Chinese medicine they were saying stay away from nature and stay away from being outside. They're talking about appropriate exposure. And if you're doing cold water swimming in the winter, or having a quick cold shower, hot and cold shower, and then you're getting warm again and you're eating warm food, you're still keeping your organs warm, which is what the point is. When I had a look at the literature around women and menstruation and the difference between men and women in cold exposure, actually, cold exposure has a positive effect on menstrual symptoms, reducing anxiety, mood swings, irritability, anxiety, hot flushes, even for perimenopause. And also, I think I mentioned before, improved birth outcomes for women who are pregnant. So again, this has to be a personal thing. I'm not suggesting in the middle of your period to start cold water swimming. And, you may find on the day that you have your period, you don't want to go anywhere near the cold water. That's fine. And that's smart. But we hear these little bits of information. I think we take them completely out of context. If it is a regular practice, or even if it's not a regular practice and you do begin it, but you begin it in small increments, like I said, just your hands in cold water for a minute every day, or just some cold water on your face in the morning every day. That's cold water exposure. That's enough. Doesn't have to be jumping into a chlorinated ice bath at a gym. And that is my next point, is that this is the one part that I think is completely taken out of context. Jumping into a chlorinated ice bath, it's probably colder than it needs to be. But if you like that, then that's fine. And you've worked your way up to it and you enjoy it, then that's fine. But the chlorine actually is completely damaging to mitochondria. And the reason why you'd want that adaptation of being able to handle cold exposure and hot and cold exposure is to build mitochondria. I mean, also because it should be because you love it. I don't want to, I mean, we shouldn't make every single judgment about our life based on the minutiae, scientific minutiae. That's not what I'm saying at all. But yeah, I'm not into the chlorine ice baths. I think they defeat the purpose. And yeah, anyway, that's enough of that. So there was a group of doctors around in the 1800s called the sanitarium doctors, which is where you get sanitarium health food from. And this was kind of like I said, pre-germ theory. And they always, their toolkit was sun, fresh air, rest, emotional work, and some herbs, some homeopathy, basically naturopathic. And one of the things that they used all the time was hydrotherapy. So hot water and cold water exposure was a huge facet of their modality. And, you know, this is what now, I guess, hydrotherapy is still used specifically in naturopathy, and it's probably not really used in any other area, but applications of hydrotherapy are as a tonic and as stimulant, that when they've done tests on blood cells, white and red blood cells, after exposure either to cold water or hot and cold showers. But I've forgotten what they've called again. I'll see them in a minute, I'm sure. Written it down somewhere. But if you do 3 minutes in a hot shower and alternate it with, 1 minute to 2 minutes of a cold shower and do that a couple of times, this also yields the same kind of result as if you were doing just a cold plunge or a cold shower. It does seem to increase our white and our blood and our red blood cells. It works as a expectorant, which means if you have a cough or a cold that's sticking, it helps to move the mucus so you can actually get it out of the body. Works as a sedative, diuretic, good for digestion, circulation, heart conditions, cardiovascular conditions, pain, depression. There's very good outcomes in regards to exercise recovery, and it's also incredibly good to increase sweating. So this is particularly for hot baths or the intermittent contrast alternating hot and cold showers. Bring on this sweating, which, like I mentioned before, is incredibly healing. I mentioned that in that podcast of mine that I mentioned before. That's one of the things I do when I'm sick. I have a magnesium bath and I use a tea like yarrow, elderflower and peppermint, which helps to induce sweating. Have a really hot bath, drink that tea, rug up, get into bed, and let the fever come on, and it does wonders in the healing process. So hot water and cold water has different thermal actions. So heat is like sedating, relaxing. It vasodilates, so it opens up the blood vessels. It relaxes, it decreases and then increases heart rate. Helps with metabolism, digestive system, reduction of pain, and muscle soreness. And again, helps with the sweating. cold water stimulates and tonifies the tissues. So it strengthens the tissues. And, like I said, it helps with the body's adaptation to stress, which is really important. It makes us more resilient. It's a positive stressor. If you can do it slowly over time, it becomes a positive stressor, which can help you respond in a more measured way to various stresses that we get in our life, including emotional and physical stresses. Cold water constricts the tissues, constricts the blood vessels initially, but it actually has a relaxing effect long term, which is why I'm saying this is why for heart conditions, if you don't have that initial adaptation, if you haven't been doing it for a while, it means that it could be a problem. But if you're doing it for a long time, it's going to be good for heart conditions. It tonifies the nervous system, which was what I was saying before. It makes you more adaptive to stress, reduces pain and inflammation, and also stimulates the digestive system. So yeah, like I said, one of the easiest, cheapest things that you can do if you want to have this effect of all of the things that I've been saying, hot and cold showers, like 3 to 1. So 3 minutes in the hot shower, a minute cold, alternate, do it a few times over. This is going to give you, all of these benefits without, getting into a chlorinated freezing cold ice bath. You get exactly the same results from doing this, and it's a lot more pleasant and it's a lot cheaper. And just another word on, the use of hydrotherapy that I was saying the sanitariums and naturopathic practice uses, is that there's different reflex points around the body. So you don't actually have to expose the whole body, which is what I was saying before. If you use the hands, that works on the lungs, the brain, the nasal passages, even really good for blood noses and things, putting hands in cold water. If you put your feet in cold water, again, it's good for the lungs, it's good for the uterus, the bladder, and the brain. And you can basically work with any organ. I'm not going to go into all of them now. This is just to give you a brief overview, but you can use water as a therapeutic for all kinds of conditions, using this kind of this reflexology of the body. So, putting hot and cold packs on various areas can have incredible therapeutic effects. And I'm just wondering if I've covered everything. I think so. I just, I hope that this has given you a bit of a picture that, water's profound and we can use it for so many different things. And I think the most important part of this is like having an awareness and beginning a relationship with water. It has, all kinds of benefits that kind of touch on emotional, spiritual, physical. For me, I think I don't use any other therapy as much as I use water. I use it weekly when I swim. The water that I'm drinking, I use it with juicing. When I'm unwell, like I said, I bathe, I sunbathe, which also, like I said in the beginning, charges your EZ water. Every way that I personally interact with my body when I'm trying to heal it is interacting with the water. And, since I've been working with my body that way, I've had incredible results from it. So, food for thought. Thanks for listening, everyone, and we'll talk next time.